After having only one direct sequel, Hammer's Frankenstein series was rebooted in 1964 with The Evil of Frankenstein. While the first two films attempted to avoid evoking the Universal movies due to copyright reasons, this one came on the heels of an agreement between the two studios over distribution. This liberated the filmmakers to draw inspiration from the popular 1931 version, for better or for worse. The movie begins with Baron Frankenstein and his assistant Hans, a different Hans from the previous movie, returning to the doctor's hometown due to a lack of resources. 10 years prior, Frankenstein had attempted to create a living being in order to answer a plethora of scientific questions. Instead, he created a monster, which was destroyed by the authorities, who arrested the Baron and forced him out of town. Returning with the intention to sell some of his old possessions, he finds his creation frozen in ice, prompting him to resume his work. However, he requires the aid of a hypnotist named Zoltan, who kind of looks like Dan Aykroyd, to stimulate the monster's brain. As you would guess, this ultimately proves to be his undoing. One of the prominent aspects of this film is the immense inspiration that it draws from the Universal movie, right down to the vaguely familiar musical score by Don Banks. This actually proves to be one of the biggest detriments here. Since it replicates so much from the 1930s version, the film doesn't really have much of its own identity. The sets and overall atmosphere definitely harken back to James Whale's iconic work. One area where this is more prevalent is the laboratory, which seems less practical than Hammer's previous films and more like something out of a science fiction piece. Likewise, the creature blatantly resembles the Boris Karloff rendition in design. Instead of coming off as a welcome homage, it's just distracting how lackluster it is in comparison. Not only does the material look laughably cheap, but it renders the creature completely devoid of any facial expressions. At least Peter Cushing remains consistently great as Frankenstein, appropriately giving a more thoughtful performance as he reflects on past experiences and reacts to the radically different state that his home is in. Sandor Elais as Hans, while not remotely terrible, doesn't have quite the same wit or edge as Francis Matthews. For the most part, he's relegated to being a yes man, not contributing anything to the plot and also not believably being on the same level of conversation as Frankenstein. Peter Woodthorpe is mostly cartoonish as Zoltan, sneering and smirking his way through his performance and acting transparently underhanded to the point of annoyance. On the other hand, Katie Wilde is likable enough in her naive wanderings as the deaf, mute beggar girl, not having much to do, but remaining refreshingly pure compared to the rest of the double-crossing characters. Lastly, we have Kiwi Kingston as the creature. Despite not really adding anything new, he's fine in the role, definitely leaning more towards Boris Karloff's infantile demeanor. In spite of how good or bad the performances are, it is difficult to care about the characters when they constantly make asinine decisions. What makes Frankenstein think that someone hasn't already made off with his valuable paintings in the last 10 years? Why does Zoltan order the creature to go after his enemies when he should know the obvious risks? Even taking away the fact that no one seems to have any common sense, the story itself just seems recycled, predictable, and even nonsensical at times. Why did we need to bring mysticism into a story that has been purely scientific up to this point? It robs this film of the central theme of the previous two, which was that man cannot triumph over nature. In addition, the direction by Freddie Francis, while still sure-handedly competent, doesn't have the same stylistic flair that he would later employ in Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. In the end, The Evil of Frankenstein sports fine performances, decent direction, and well-constructed sets. In conjunction, it admittedly offers a uniquely stylistic mix of Hammer and Universal, but the lack of originality and uninspired script make it one of the weaker entries in the series.